Namaste and welcome to another edition of Live, Love, Engage. And I am Gloria Grace Rand, of course, your host. And I am delighted to have a gentleman on the show today who is going to be really enlightening us about how to make companies better. I'll leave it at that for now, but we're going to go into much more detail in a second. But first off, I want to welcome Omar L. Harris to Live, Love, Engage.
Thank you very much, Gloria. How are you this evening?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And
All right.
I'm looking forward to this discussion because I've been doing my research on you, and you're quite the accomplished gentleman. And so I'm actually going to dive into that first before we get into um, asking questions. I want to just share with our listeners and viewers on YouTube just what you're all up to in the world. So
Mhm.
Mr. Harris is the founder of Intent Consulting. He has over 20 years of a global pharmaceutical executive experience building teams, worked on 4 continents, and he's been the former general manager of GSK and Allergan. He's also a speaker and an award-winning best-selling author of 5 books, including his latest, which is something we are going to be talking about in a little bit. It's called Be a Jedi Leader, Not a Boss. And I love that title. So it has nothing to do with Star Wars. No,
Yeah.
instead, it is leadership in the era of corporate social justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And if that's not enough, I guess in your well, I'm sure you've had to do this by being a global executive. He speaks 5 languages, also plays 7 instruments, and started his first company at the tender age of 7. So I guess you've got a bit, even though you've worked in the corporate world, I guess you also have a bit of the entrepreneurial spirit about you. So I thought we'd start with that, is to
Okay.
tell us your overall journey that got you where you are today. What did that look like?
Yes. Well, I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but I've lived all over the U.S. as growing up. So I moved to West Virginia, Lake Charles, Louisiana. I went to college in Tallahassee, Florida, at Florida A&M University, down the street from you, or up the street rather.
Yeah.
Um, I've also lived in, Detroit, Michigan, Philadelphia, parts of New Jersey as well in my U.S. part of my journey. I got into pharmaceuticals early when I was at Florida A&M when I did my first internship with Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, which everyone knows very well because of the vaccine. But I was a sales rep with Pfizer in Detroit, Michigan for 8 months. I did an international marketing rotation with Pfizer in Sao Paulo, Brazil, which was my first international assignment at the age of 23. I graduated with my MBA at 25 and then began matriculating through the pharmaceutical industry from that point on, primarily in marketing at first, and then getting into leadership roles, and then ultimately operations, which led me to be a general manager in countries like Indonesia and Brazil as well. So, really along my journey, um, I got a taste for positive psychology really early in my career.
Hmm.
Got a taste for servant leadership very early in my career as well. Working for some phenomenal leaders who really supported me and really developed me early in my career. Got to do some entrepreneurial things at the right stages of my career as well, and gained from experience from failure actually, and then also learned from kind of being isolated in different cultural experiences, living in Istanbul, Turkey, and also Indonesia and Brazil. So, really have had a pretty interesting journey. I'm somebody who I call myself a seeker. I'm always trying to understand more about the world, the universe, and not someone who thinks I've figured out anything as of yet. But whatever I have figured out, I try to pass on to everyone else who is interested in trying to go on the same type of journey. I really believe that leadership is a journey,
Mm.
and it disheartens me that people, when they get into a managerial position, they stop developing themselves. And this is really, it's when you need the most development is when you become responsible for other people's lives basically. And so that's when you need the most development, the most support. But it seems like people actually take the easy way. And so I'm trying to help break up that paradigm. Very passionate about building new leaders, empowering new leaders, and letting people know that there are multiple paths to success. You don't have to do it the way that we've seen it be done. You don't have to do it with the ego. You can do it with love, actually, and be just as successful, even more successful, because you bring people with you, and you build people up.
Wow. Um, what struck me about what you just talked about was the fact that you had your first opportunity to really work in a different country early on. I mean, in your early
Yes.
20s. And I'm wondering, has that experience, being able to be, working in different countries, experiencing different cultures, how did that impact you, maybe even personally, but also professionally, in your desire for leadership? Because I think so often, living here in the United States, and people who don't get a chance to get outside of the United States, we get this very narrow view of, certainly, of the world, and I think it hurts us in being able to not only even deal with our own peers, but also then dealing with people who are living in the different countries or have a different culture. And I'm especially impressed with this because I'm so blessed that my kids are sort of following in that path. My daughter's actually
Great.
living in Hungary right now, and my son has already
Wonderful.
taken a trip to Portugal this summer, and so they're starting to, take advantage of that and learning about other cultures.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that it's fundamental. For me, it was fundamental to get that experience early in my career. I think that it required living overseas. It's one thing is visiting, other thing is living. So to survive overseas is a whole different beast, and it will bring out different things of yourself. I don't know if you're familiar with I'm sure you are, the Johari window concept of the known unknown, the known known, and basically the four quadrant zone of
Right.
self-awareness. And
Yeah.
so I really believe that the unknown unknown zone, which is basically, things you don't know about yourself and things others don't know about you as well, you can only figure that out by throwing yourselves into these kind of foreign experiences. So I think a great way to learn about yourself is to put yourself into a foreign context and survive, and go from surviving to thriving in that context. And I think that that was something that I learned early on. I remember an early experience in Brazil when I got there. I didn't speak the language, and so I was basically eating McDonald's twice a day.
Oh dear.
uh, Basically, I was doing my own, like, what was the name of the movie? Super Size Me. I was doing that myself. I did my own experiment when I was 23 years old,
Oh boy.
and I could only eat the Big Mac combo because the only thing I could say was numero uno, which is number one. I couldn't even ask for an apple pie for dessert because I couldn't say the word for pie. It was a very frustrating
Oh,
experience, but it gave me all the fuel I needed to want to learn the language, because otherwise I was going to be eating McDonald's for the rest of my life.
yeah.
So I think that was the kind of things you learn, simple as that, but also much more complex lessons as well, that I
Mm,
picked up, learning in these cultures, and really appreciating someone else's history, and
mm,
learning that the history of how history determines the present, and really getting that context culturally, especially when you're leading people of a different culture as well. You really need to understand kind of the historical background and appreciate that background, while still trying to disrupt some of that background if you're trying
mm.
to modernize leadership approaches and whatnot. So I think that, but the first thing to do is appreciate and try to assimilate as much as possible. Then you can innovate on top of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I think that's great that you've been able to do that. And so have you then incorporated like a lot of those lessons in, like, when you came back to the States? Well, or and actually, well, let me ask you, did you, when you were working overseas, then did you come back and work in the United States then before you, left the corporate world and started your own firm?
Oh, definitely. So my story is kind of bouncing back and forth.
Mm,
I mean, I think in my early part of my career, I had that internship experience in Brazil when I was 23. I think I got my MBA at 25, and I started working in the U.S. And I worked in the U.S. from 2002 up until 2012. So I had 10 years in the United States. Well, sorry, I said that wrong. I worked in the U.S. from 2002 to 2006.
Yeah.
Then I went back to Brazil for 2 years. Then I came back to the US in 2008, and I was in the US from 2008 to 2012. Then I moved to Turkey, Indonesia, Brazil, then back to the US. So
Wow.
I've kind of been bouncing around. But the one thing I'll say about the Brazilian experience specifically is um, what leadership style that works in Brazil is the servant leadership style, because one of the things that you pick up there is that they expect their leaders to, even if you could be the most rich person in the world, they expect their leaders to be humble and to be people who are relatable, and to be people who are very likable. So the more likable, more relatable, more humble you are, the more you can get out of your people. So
Mm.
if you're assimilating, I grab those tools and I put them into my toolkit, and then it was my first leadership experience as well. So you just take that forward. And it was very helpful to have led in that cultural context, because then I bring that back to the US in 2008 and then refine on top of it. Then I go to Istanbul, and now I'm working with people from 30 different countries across a vast region. And that skill set is even more important in that context. And then so it goes on from there.
Wow. Well, let's shift gears just slightly, but let's talk a little bit more now about um, this concept that you have about being a Jedi leader. And
Yes.
so, and it's you're really talking about, just as in Star Wars, that it's like being a force for good. I love how you
Yes.
came up with that. People who are going to empower and enable them. So, um, why is it so important for businesses to adopt that type of leadership style?
Well, I think businesses has is a means to an end, right? It's been a way of achieving an objective for millennia. And if you think about the changes that have undergone, that have happened in business over the course of the last 200 years, you begin to understand, the Industrial Revolution was about, primarily poor, rural, white people, workers coming from the fields and from the suburbs into the cities to gain opportunity. And then they built you know, they built the Industrial Revolution on the back of that. And then during World War II, you have women coming into the workforce because the men were out fighting, and then that introduces, and then you have civil rights, and you have more African Americans coming into the workforce. And along this journey, leadership is not changing, but
Mm,
but the composition of the people doing the work is dramatically changing. And
mm,
now we live in a world where we have the most diverse workforce in history in terms of generations, different nationalities, different ethnicities, different gender identities, different sexual orientations, all blending together trying to do the same work. And leadership is lagging far behind. The
mm,
science of leadership is lagging far behind the actual necessities of leadership, which is why we see trends like the Great Resignation today and things of this nature happening. And when you think about the four words in Jedi, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, they become a lot more. The more heterogeneous the group is, the more it's a requirement for you to begin to think about how they perceive the work environment, a work environment that wasn't built for them and hasn't necessarily evolved over time, right?
mhm.
So some of the same practices and principles that were in place in the early 1900s, the 40-hour work week, that still exists in 2021, right?
Right.
Punching the clock, which was invented in the early 1900s. All these archaic kind of concepts of management and leadership are still in place, but the people doing the work is so different, and so because they're different, the experience of work is different, and so um, these injustices persist and these inequities are prevalent, and people don't feel appreciated for the unique qualities they're bringing into to the work, and they don't feel a sense of belonging, really. They don't feel like that anybody cares about them in their place of work. And so for me, this is fundamental work. This is work that should have been done a long time ago. This is work that all of the management science luminaries since Stephen Covey have been talking about for
Mm,
20 years. And despite selling millions or hundreds of millions of books, leadership is not changing.
yeah.
And so that's really kind of, that creates a lane and an avenue for more people to keep speaking up about this issue. But for me, coming from a corporate background, not from a theoretical or academic background, um, I have seen these things, and now it's about, okay, so this is what I know what happens, I know why they happen, and I know also I can recommend strategies to navigate this in a more effective way for everyone.
Hmm. Um, why should someone, like let's say, why should a manager really follow your advice and really do it? I mean, really, because a lot of times, like as you said earlier on, it's
Mhm.
like people take the safe way out. They're
Right,
not
right.
pursuing, even personal growth when they get to be a manager. They're not doing the things they need to do. They sort of get stuck in, and you get stuck in your comfort zone and you don't stretch yourself. So why should they be able to, what is it going to be, you know, f- what's in it? People always want to know what's in it for me. And so it's like, it's like the bottom line is like, oh yeah, it
Right,
sounds great
right.
to be able to have my people, feeling
Mhm.
great, but they want to know, why should I really do this? What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, what's in it for you now is your career survival. We're at a point,
Mm,
a juncture in time now where these things are just not going to be tolerated anymore.
mm,
People are voting with their feet. They're leaving bad managers. There's a report earlier this year from the Predictive Index talking about the causes of the Great Resignation, and 64% of employees who had a bad manager are contemplating leaving their company versus only 27% of employees with a good manager.
mm,
So this is fundamental work. Actually, other work from I read a report from McKinsey Company last week over the fact about the Women in Work report, and it talks about the fact that women leaders are far better and superior leaders than their male counterparts, and because of these soft skills and soft attributes that we
right.
talk about. And so it all adds up to the same equation. Leadership, the standard is changing. If you don't get on the train of the new standard, you are not going to have a manager position moving forward. So what's in it for you is your livelihood. What's in it for you is your ability, your license to operate as a manager, your ability to get things done, and your ability to succeed. Because the ego-driven ambition, me approach to climbing the corporate ladder is going
Mhm,
out of the window in
mhm,
favor of leaders who know how to maximize collective talent, lead collaboration, generate innovation, solve problems faster in an agile manner, and generate results
mhm,
consistently. And a me manager just can't do it. It's literally impossible for you to do that in today's day and age in most sectors. Now there's some sectors that are still lagging behind. I mean, financial and maybe pharmaceutical, even healthcare are lagging behind, but they're going to catch up.
mm. Excellent.
And if you want a job of the future, you want to work in tech, you want to work in anything like that, you're going to have to really embrace these principles.
Yeah. Awesome. I wanted to talk to you for a second, if it's okay. And I was reading uh, an article that you had done on your blog about where you were talking about Simone Biles
Yes,
and
yes, yes.
this degree of difficulty, and having that be, versus, and all coinciding that or contradicting with like
Right.
privileged people. Can you talk a
Mhm.
little bit about that? Because I thought it was a really well done and really
Yeah,
gave me, pause to think about it, that it's like we do need to consider
yeah.
that.
I'm
Yeah.
coughing. Give me a second. I'm coughing.
Yeah.
Just mark the spot so we can skip over it. Sorry about
It's all
that.
right.
Something in my throat. Thank you for that question. I think that it occurred to me that we don't have a measure of the what it takes to succeed, and we really don't take into account what everyone's journey is to succeed. I'm listening to a book by Chris Gardner right now, who's the guy from The Pursuit of Happiness,
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
Will Smith plays in the movie, and he's a
Right.
very successful businessman and author and global speaker now. But he was talking about, if you think about his story, a man who was near homeless with a single child, trying to break into investment banking with no previous experience, and
Mhm.
not only getting in, passing the test, but becoming a successful investment banker. If you compare his story to someone who grew up in the suburbs and went to the best schools and went to the best university and happened upon investment banking and was always expected to succeed in that field, it is, the degree of difficulty for Chris Gardner versus that other individual is is significant,
Yeah.
and we have no way to reckon for that in our talent management conversations today in corporations. We don't take it into account, someone's identity or someone's struggle. I guess we're trying to treat everybody the same, but
Right.
actually that's where inequity comes in, is when you start treating everyone the same. If you
Mhm.
have a single mother of two who's an executive versus a young upstart, single woman who's in her late 20s, their experience of work is not the same,
Mhm.
and there should be some credit due to the person who does it while dealing with tougher stuff. There should be some degree of consideration when we have conversations about someone's all-round skill set, their intangibles.
Mhm.
Because, for me, if you can succeed despite all the baggage you're handling,
Mhm.
that means to me you're going to be a significantly better leader than someone who's never had to navigate any obstacles, right?
Right.
Someone who life has been basically, blue sky, and never really had to face any real adversity. So I think that, we know that adversity makes us better. We know that a ship's captain is not determined in calm seas, but in stormy seas.
Right.
And so if handling adversity is something we value so much in leaders today, then we should be accounting for that adversity when we talk about talent management, potential, all these things. We just look at the work that's being done in a period of time, but we never account for the degree of difficulty that different people are going through, because we don't even know. We're not asking the right questions.
Yeah.
And so this is where, the whole trying to be so egalitarian and equal, treat everybody the same way, actually is a disservice to people from underprivileged identities, because they don't get credit for how hard it is for them to be in the same room as some other
Mhm.
people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why I say I loved that article, because it really did hit home to me. Because yeah, there are people who, as you say, who struggle, or who have grown up with some disadvantages, and then they still succeed, versus someone who had it a bit easier.
Right,
And
right.
so to just be able to say, okay, well, you're both the same. Well, not really, no,
No,
because yeah, someone was uh, perhaps hungrier, and I don't necessarily mean that literally, but they were
right,
hungrier in spirit to be able to
right.
get the job done.
And actually, I want to argue that privilege should come with a higher degree of altruism, but it doesn't.
Mm,
So if you were privileged and you didn't have to navigate these barriers to get to where you are, then you should be far more grateful for what you received due to no effort of your own, and be far more altruistic than we see in our society today. So for me, if you are privileged, if you come from a privileged background, I wrote another blog about reconciling my own privilege
mm,
and talking about the fact that I've received a lot of privilege in my journey of my life, and that's what's made me so humble and altruistic today, is the fact that I don't forget about my privileges, and I know that it's my job to pay them forward to others, versus just, basically say, hey, that's the way of the world. you know that's your journey, this is my journey, and it's nobody's fault, and nobody has any responsibility or accountability for
mhm.
anyone else's journey in life. I think that's a flawed argument.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's cop out is what what comes to mind. I don't I don't like that, because I do, you know, it's like I do believe in justice and being fair, and with fairness, you also need to look at all the everything, not
Right,
just certain areas, but looking at the whole person. So
right.
hopefully folks that are listening to this will heed that. I appreciate you
And
talking
one other point about fairness is, first
about.
of all, if the starting point isn't the same, then it's never going to be fair.
Mm, right.
So that's so we talk about fairness as if there was a great moment where everybody got to the same level playing field, and we are now on the same level playing field, and basically it's all equal from here.
Yeah.
No. If you perceive someone being equal to you because they have struggled for that equality, they've struggled to be in the same place as you. I mean, I remember there's the comedian Chris Rock has a great bit in one of his shows where he talks about, you know he lives in a neighborhood with Jay-Z and Mary J. Blige, right? Who are the absolute best at what they do in entertainment. Like he's the best comedian, she's the best singer, and he's the best rapper. And if you want to know who their neighbor is, their neighbor is a dentist, a white dentist, or a lawyer. Not the best lawyer, just a
Right.
lawyer. Just
Yeah.
but to get into that neighborhood, he had to be the absolute pinnacle of his career and profession to be able
Mm,
to reside in the same place
yeah.
as a dentist or a doctor or a lawyer, and who are not even the best at what they do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Ah, it's a challenging world we live in, and the hopeful thing I think is that there are folks like you out there who are bringing these subjects
Mhm.
forward and talking about it, and hopefully it will continue to get through to people, and they will start to be able to implement these changes that are so needed. um, I want to go back a little bit because I think it's also important for people to know that the entrepreneurial journey is not easy, and even for people who, as you said, you had some privilege, but you did mention that you had made some mistakes or had some failures along the
Mhm.
way. So can you share what was like something you failed at, and maybe what was the lesson you learned from it?
Yeah. So when I basically my corporate career was interrupted twice. It was interrupted in 2009 when another company bought my pharma company,
Mm.
and I decided at that moment to take the severance package and go off on my own. And so then I ended up working for a startup where we were trying to basically create some inclusive technology for corporations. And really, what I learned in doing that work was basically you have to make sure you have a good partner.
Mm.
So, I didn't pick the right partner. We didn't have the same vision for what we were trying to accomplish, probably because we're from different generations. So my partner was, a gentleman who had survived cancer, who was in his 70s, and a 6'5" Italian, with white hair, uh, and who just survived cancer survivor. And I, was at the time was 34 years old. The world was my oyster and trying to, create the next big thing. And so we could never get on the same page about what we were trying to accomplish with this business. And that ultimately sunk the business. And so, some conflict is productive and it actually can drive towards better results, but some conflict is destructive. And
Mm.
if you can't get on the same page around the ultimate goal you're trying to pursue in the short term, even a medium term, as an entrepreneur, if your partners are not aligned to that, let's say you have partners who their exit strategy is to sell in 2 years, and you want to build something in 10 years, it's not going to work. and so we failed to raise the money to sell the company because we
Mm.
were trying to just build the application out. And so we didn't follow the traditional kind of beta testers. And then, you know, it was always about, making money versus making meaning. And so
Mm.
I learned from that experience that, when you try to make money, that's your whole purpose. You will probably fail more quickly than if you try to make meaning, something meaningful that changes and enhances people's lives. That'll be something that's has a lot more longevity to it. And so you don't have to rush that process,
Mm.
because you're trying to make meaning, and meaning comes from the outside in. Like you can't determine what meaning is for someone else. They have to tell you. And so that's a longer process to figure that out.
Yeah.
And so that was an important entrepreneur lesson that I gained at that time in my career.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. And yeah, I do know that, yeah, picking the right partner is very important. I was working with someone that it started off great, and then we started having different visions for how we wanted to take things, and I realized, I finally said, I think we're better off just going our separate ways. And luckily
Yeah.
we hadn't really gotten too far along in even monetizing anything, and so it was a nice clean break. But yeah,
Okay.
you've got to be very, very careful about that,
Yeah.
uh, and really vet the person, and I guess get to know them, and what their goals are early on. So I appreciate that you sharing that story with us. Uh,
Well,
is there anything that you wish you had known when you first started out, especially even other than that,
Mm.
even in some of your entrepreneurial ventures that you've had?
I think that I was waiting to be in a position of influence to make changes happen within corporations, kind of
Mm,
working the inside track, you're changing from the inside, right? But you're trying to wait until you have enough weight behind your position to make change, and I realize that's a faulty premise. I think that you can make change happen at any level in an organization
mm,
just by being courageous and speaking up and letting people know just what you see and what you don't see. So, for example, when I came into my career as a marketer with an MBA in 2002, I didn't see any other African American people in marketing.
mm,
So I could have, basically told my boss or talked to HR or said, "Hey, what are we doing?" I had mentors, African American mentors in HR, and we could have had a conversation about let's strategize about how do we do this better,
mm,
because we're not seeing it happen. But you don't think it's I didn't take responsibility for that. Um, I just observed it and noted it, but I didn't do anything about
mm,
it. And so I think that if something bothers you, it's an opportunity. That little itch you have. These are all
mm,
opportunities for improvement. It's the same thing that drives the entrepreneurial instinct. Is that these little problems you see? That's the basis of entrepreneurialism. Is basically solving problems that other people may feel, but they haven't. No one else has done it, or no one else has done it the way you want to do it. And so listen to that little voice because that's the beginning of innovation and beginning of change. And everybody can make change happen from any position
mm.
in an organization. And if you work for an organization that doesn't support those type of changes, then you get find an organization that does. And you learn that early on. If you speak up and get shut down, then it's probably better for you to go someplace where you can actually, contribute from the beginning. Because just because you're new in an organization doesn't mean you don't have anything to contribute.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's something that I would have, if I could go back, I would
Mhm.
probably be a lot more assertive early on related to that particular issue
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
it still hasn't been solved. I mean, you still don't see a lot of diversity in certain roles
Mhm.
like finance or IT or marketing,
Mm,
sales leadership. You don't see, and these are kind of high profile roles in organizations, and you still don't see that coming through.
mm.
And it's because everyone's waiting for someone else to do the job. we're all waiting for somebody to come and do it, and no
Yeah,
one's doing it. So we
yeah,
might as well do it. We might as well do it. So I think that's the
absolutely.
big
Yeah,
thing.
that
No, don't wait.
definitely. So very good advice because yeah, if you wait, and that's something that I've learned as well. Because if you wait too long for anybody else to do it, then it's not going to get done. So you might as well do it yourself. So
Yeah.
that's awesome. Is there anything else that I haven't asked you about that you'd like to share with our listeners today?
No, I mean, I think that the last part about this type of leadership and this leadership transformation that we're advocating for is it's a better way to live.
Mm,
It enhances your life. So it's not only about your livelihood and keeping your license to operate, but it also enhances your own life when you connect with people individually and understand their stories and start to develop them. You get boosted by every single person you help achieve and develop and grow. And so this is something that I would like everyone to experience for themselves as a leader is that boost that comes from actually not just not just achieving a number or whatever it is, but helping the people around you get better. That's the best kind of boost in corporations.
mm, awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your wisdom with us today, and also for all the good work that you're doing. And I really appreciate it. If someone listening would like to know more about you, maybe see how they can, get a hold of one of your books, what's the best way for people to reach out?
On my website, www.omarlharris.com, has all my other links. If you're on LinkedIn, you can also find me under Omar L. Harris. I think those are the two best places for us to interact.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you again for being with us today. I really appreciate it. And I
Thank
will
you
make
very
sure that I
much.
have all your information in the show notes for those who are listening. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right. And thank you out there as well for listening and for subscribing. And in fact, I also want to give a shout out to Liz Kelly, who recently left us a 5-star review on Podchaser. So we really appreciate that. And if you would like to leave us a review, I might give you a shout out as well. So take advantage of that. And if you also would ever like to have a chance to chat with me about anything, you can also go to engagewithgloria.com and set up an appointment. And, if you need some help getting clear on your goals, I'm happy to help you out with that. So until next time, as always, I encourage you to go out and live fully, love deeply, and engage authentically.